Here's your business podcast with Frank Furness.
Right, we're to the next step of the sales cycle now. We've looked at where do we find the prospects, what do we say to them on the phone, how do we develop rapport, what kind of questions do we ask. We've done all that, and now we've got to present our solution, close the sale, and overcome objections. Ian, how can NLP help us in those areas?
Well, at risk of repetition, I'm going to come back to the magic three numbers again. 7, 38, 55. This is so important in the presentation because what you say is actually a small part of the overall process. Having said that, there will be many occasions where that 7% is really going to count, and it will make the difference between getting a sale and not getting a sale. I'll kick off by just reviewing some of the stuff that we did on visual, auditory and kinesthetic. If you get the rep system right, your presentation will be so much more valuable. If you understand that if you're with a very visual audience or a very auditory audience, and by the way, if the audience is greater than 10 people, you've probably got all three, in which case your presentation will be, well, if you want to take a look at this, we've got a few things, and what I'm trying to say is blah, blah, and you might feel such and such, and you put in everything, which is probably not a bad idea anyway, because sometimes you get a combination in the one person as well. If you're dealing with engineers, the chances are there are going to be quite a few kinesthetics in there, and the meeting won't start until you handle them some samples that they can physically handle in their hands. If you're dealing with accountants, there's going to be a lot of AD people, and there's going to be a lot more numbers. If you're dealing with senior management, once again, it's going to be AD, big chunk. We haven't done chunking yet, and that's about having the conceptual level right. So you're talking big chunks, you're talking market share, dominance, differential versus the competition. So the language that you use can have a very big contribution to having an effective presentation. Now, before we get on to the presentation itself, we're going to be talking a little bit at some stage in this program about reframing. And the reason I mention that now is because probably the most common question I get asked at my NLP trainings is, Ian, there's all these dozens, if not hundreds, of NLP techniques. Which is the most powerful one, if you were to pick one? And I would say reframing. Now, I need to take 1 minute to just explain my terms here, because I need to use this in a little bit in presentation skills. Reframing, if I say it to you, I'll warn you straight away now, it doesn't sound very exotic or sexy or technical or complicated. It's something that we all do all the time, but the chances are you aren't familiar with it to a high level of proficiency, because it's something that we have been exposed to from teachers to kids to grown-ups. Reframing is quite simply having a different perspective on the same thing. So, for example, the old phrase, what's the difference between an optimist and a pessimist? An optimist sees the cup as half full. A pessimist sees the cup as half empty. They're looking at the same thing, but they're seeing something different. So reframing is dynamite. In fact, if you want to be a master of using NLP for selling, be a master of reframing. Because what happens in a sales presentation is you're explaining something and the prospect, their state is, and they're listening, and, not much is going on. And then you'll say something like, and what that means is blah, blah. And then their eyes light up and they look at you and say, wow, that's incredible. You've been talking about the same thing for the past half hour, possibly, but you just give them that ability to look at it from a different angle, see something in it that maybe they hadn't noticed before, even though you'd been talking about it in different ways. That's a reframe. Now, if you want to use reframing in selling, there's two ways in the sales presentation. One is the example I just gave. You might be explaining a feature that they've been looking at for the past half hour and suddenly explain that it has a particular relevance to them. You make a connection that they hadn't made, even though you've been looking at the same thing for quite a while. The second way of using reframing in the sales presentation is a pre-frame. That's something to set the scene before the presentation. And I've used this and it works beautifully. In fact, I'll give you an example, then I'll explain what I did. In my engineering company, I went up to see a paper mill in the north of England, and the management asked me to make a presentation, and they'd already told me that they hadn't met me in time and the order had already gone to my competition. which was, by the way, a very big order. So they said, but we'd like to hear what you've got anyway. Come and give us a presentation. And I said, sure, how much stuff do you want? And they said, about a 45-minute technical presentation on your non-stick coatings. So I said, okay. I brought an inch-thick pile of overhead transparencies, switched on the overhead slide projector, and then switched it off again. You might be wondering why I did that. That was to break their state and to interrupt their pattern, because I knew that as soon as they were into a presentation mode, they were going to be going, oh hum, here we go, another guy giving a sales presentation. Now, you don't want that. You want them to be going, what's going on? So I switched the overhead projector on, switched it off, and I could tell that I'd got their interest. And then I said, by the way, before we start the meeting, can you just tell me what kind of thing you're looking for from this meeting? Everybody went quiet, and I noticed people were looking at the big boss, and the big boss said, well, we're looking for something that'll just reduce our cleaning time. And I said, well, I can give you that. And by the way, I can give you that in a way, when you were talking to the competition, did they talk about the fact that they had a phosphoric acid pre-wash? He says, yes, they did. Well, phosphoric acid can have a negative corrosive effect on some of your equipment. We don't have that. Anyway, I talked like this for about 15 minutes. At the end of the 15 minutes, the big boss said, can you get hold of the accounting people? Let's see if we can stop the check that we've already written. Now, why do I tell you all that? Because what I did was I used reframing and pre-framing as part of my presentation. These are two absolutely dynamite NLP techniques, because if you think about it from the point of view of buyer's resistance, if they know it's a sales presentation, they're going to be more resistant. But if it's, before we start the meeting, can I just ask? Their resistance is going to be about 1/10 of what it normally would be, and they're much more receptive to everything you've got to say. The next thing about making a sales presentation powerful is, and I think you know what's coming now, state. You've got to have people in the state you want to have them in. So you've got to think about the states that you do want, and you've got to think about the states that you do not want. Now, the state that you want by a mile is curiosity. By the way, Frank, did I tell you about my time at Toastmasters?
No, tell me, Ian.
Oh, gee, this was a real painful one because I did it too fast, which goes to show it's not what you say, it's how you say it. Sometimes you can go too fast. You do trainings, Frank. Have you ever had an audience where you really wanted them to be curious?
I have, yes.
Yeah, and you know, there's one way to do it.
Tell me, Ian.
Yeah, do you want to know? Because there's one really good way.
Tell me.
Right? So that's what I did, right? Do you notice I was doing it, right?
Yeah.
So I had this bunch, and it was like 400, 500 Toastmasters in, again, Kuala Lumpur. And I said, do you want to know how to make an audience curious? And they said, yes. And I said, because there's one way. There's one really good way. Do you want to know what it is? And they're all getting like, yes. Right, on to the next subject. And I did it too quickly. So one of the biggest things you want is to have curiosity. And the purpose of the sales presentation is really twofold. Number one, manufacturing curiosity in your prospect or group of prospects. Number two is manufacturing closing. So the psychology is, and these are two very different states.
And now it's time for a word from our sponsor. So listen up.
Hey, yes, it's me back again, Frank. I'm your sponsor, and I want to tell you about a series I've put together. It's actually been 2 years in the making. I have created the biggest online course for financial advisors. If you go and take a look at www.salesstrategiesforadvisors.com, salesstrategiesforadvisors.com, please go and take a look at our sales page there. You'll see the course has 281 videos, 106 audios, 12 ebooks, and 7 sets of scripts. And I promise you will make 10 times your investment at least in this course. There are so many ideas, every kind of strategy you can think of, new things added all the time. And for actually listening to the podcast, you can actually get 50% off the course. Please don't tell anyone about it. But if you go in to the checkout where it says coupon code, all you do is type in 50OFF, 50 off, and you will immediately get a 50% off the course on the one-off payment. Or, of course, you can opt to pay $29 a month. So, hey, this is Frank. I look forward to seeing you the other side and enjoying my online course. And now, let's get back to our recording. You know what? I must have heard somebody the other day that was an NLP practitioner, because I heard this talk and he was speaking to the audience and he started up front by saying, I bet a lot of you would like to know how to close more sales. Would you like to know how to close more sales? And they were all going, yeah. And he went right off the tangent there. Yeah. And they were all sitting there saying, when are you going to tell us?
But now, this is the thing. It's so tempting to answer their question. And this is really important, because if a prospect asks you a question, so you say, blah, blah, would you like to know how to make more sales? And they say, yeah, tell us. And you go, right. But before I do, let me just, right? So that you've still got them hanging in that state of curiosity and expectation. And the worst thing you can do at that time is just tell them. Right? Because if you say to them, there's a way of manufacturing curiosity, do you want to know what it is? And they say, yeah. And they say, right, I'll come to that in a minute. By the way, at which point some of them will get it, because, yeah.
So what you're doing is you're really keeping them hanging on, saying, tell me about it.
Yeah, now, of course, the thing is, and this is really important with managing state, and the whole purpose of a sales presentation, it's called a sales presentation, but it's really a state management operation. You're managing the state of your prospect, and this is really important, and you do not find this in many NLP books, I'll warn you. How long can somebody maintain the same state? That's a great question. And the reason I train with John Overdorf and Julie Silverthorne such a lot in Philadelphia is because they take a lot of time on this. The answer, by the way, just to close that loop and illustrate the point, is 90 seconds, 90 seconds. On average, that's how long someone can hold a state. So if I say to somebody, do you want to know how to sell more? Do you want to know how to close more? And they go, yes! I say, because there's one really good way to sell a lot more and close a lot more. Do you want it? Yes! I'm telling you, it's going to, now you can keep that up for like 10 seconds and they'll be like excited. You keep it up for 5 minutes and they'll be going, get on with it. Just stop faffing around, right? So you've got to know how to understand not only managing state as a value, as something that you can crank up and down, but also remember that it's very dynamic. It will fade very quickly. And by the way, if you've ever been to a great motivational speech, some of the raw, high energy guys, they can't keep people motivated for that long, because if it's state-dependent motivation, then you just can't hold it. You can't hold curiosity for that long. You can't hold excitement, even sexual ecstasy and all these things, you can only hold them for a very short amount of time. So there's two types of things for motivating people. People that are state-dependent and people that are not state-dependent. But when you're in a sales presentation, that's what you've got to be thinking about all the time. So you can't maintain the solid level of curiosity, so you just let it go up and down. So, and a good way is to ask another question, or you can ask a rhetorical question. Like, have you ever wondered what would be the best things about making a great product? Don't answer, but you've got to admit it's an interesting question. So, these kind of things force people to go into a very, very curious state. So after you've done that for a while, and the other thing is you can do too much installing curiosity, because people biologically they can't hold it in their body it might be a 2-hour presentation to get through all of the information you've got to get. So you've got to pace it, a little bit of curiosity, and then calm, and then maybe if the audience is appropriate, some high energy stuff, clap your hands, those kind of things. And then when you get to the end, you don't want the curiosity anymore. You just want them to be in decisive mode. And here's the nice part about using NLP. If your rapport is good, your state management is good, and your questioning is good, they will close themselves. And I've done it many times now. In fact, the last paper mill, they just placed an order this week. I never asked for the order. That's when they do all the work for you. Doesn't always happen, so I will cover closing too. And frankly, it doesn't matter too much the exact words. I think it's more a question of getting the timing right, getting the rapport right. half the time when I close, in fact, I have a lot of fun with salespeople. I say to salespeople, do you want to know how I close deals? And they say, yes. So I say, well, do you want it? And they go, yes. And I said, no, that was all I say. That's the close. Do you want it? But, I mean, take your pick. I'm not big on the key differences. I know this is something you go into in more detail, but from the NLP point of view, there's not too much of a big deal between one form of close and another. So long as you get the result, NLP puts more of an emphasis on the state, the rapport, and the voice tonality, the non-verbal stuff. I've closed. I keep closes short, I think. So if there's no more questions, do we have a deal?
I think the biggest thing is, and the close that most of you will be using right now, is the assumed close. If you've done everything right, it's just an assumed close. It's going to happen. It's if you've done something wrong along the way, they're going to be having objections, and that's when you've got the problems.
This is really important. You said it earlier, Frank, and you're absolutely dead right. A lot of salespeople, they mess up because they put too much emphasis on getting the close right. And it's a little bit like when you were at school doing all your exam cramming the night before. If you've left everything up to the night before, you're in big trouble. Yeah? The exam actually started several months ago, getting familiar with the stuff, getting to know it, in which case the revision the night before should be just a few minutes, if you've done your homework well ahead of time. The sales process for me, and I'm in total agreement with you, is if you've done everything else right, you've understood what the prospect wants, you've got your rep systems right, and I keep coming back to rapport and state. If you're there, the rapport's good, the state's good, you'll find the closing is actually almost a non-event. You just say, well, okay, so, unless we're missing something, I guess that's it. Shall we go ahead? Something like that. And it's just a natural extension of the conversation that came before it. And I see so many salespeople that do what that lady just did on me. Would you like to have that money work for you? No. Because all of her sales presentation was a close. And it's a great way of killing rapport.
Absolutely. By the way, if some of you are thinking, but I want some closes, I've got some free ones for you. We always give away freebies. If you just go to my website, www.frankfurness.com, on the front page, there's 39 different closing scripts. But remember, if you're having to use these 39 closing scripts all the time, this series hasn't been working for you because you're not doing everything right. If you're doing everything right, you're developing the rapport, you're reframing, you're pre-framing, you're developing curiosity. The close is just going to be a natural extension. It's going to be just a follow-on to what you've been doing all the time. Also, remember, with your presentations, make them interesting to everybody. A lot of people I see do PowerPoint presentations, and all they do is put up the PowerPoint slides and read from them. Can you imagine if you've got an auditory sitting over there? They're going to be so bored. Hit that B button, black it out, let them see you, and let them be listening to you. If you've got something for them to see, let them feel it, let them touch it. So think about all of that and how you can change your presentations right now to close more sales.